MBS to Biden, drop dead. Herschel to Georgia, I didn't do it. Musk to Twitter, okay, I guess I'll buy you. We'll discuss all this and more on this edition of The Editors. I'm Rich Lowry, and I'm joined as always by the Right Honorable Charles C.W. Cook, Maddy Kearns, and the sage of authenticity Woods, Jim Garrity. You are, of course, listening to a National Review podcast. Our sponsors this episode are NetChoice, Babbel, and Saga. More about them in due course. If for some reason you're not already following us on a streaming service, by the way, you can find us everywhere from Spotify to iTunes. And if you like what you hear here, please consider giving us a glowing 5-star review on iTunes. If you don't like what you hear here, please forget I said anything. So as just mentioned, today we're brought to you by NetChoice, a trade organization dedicated to free expression and free enterprise online. Tech services have empowered American seniors to stay connected to the issues and people they care about. But they've been harsh targets of cyber criminals and scammers looking for ways to extract personal information and money, hack into accounts, and steal identities. Because of this, seniors expect quality care from American tech companies, which offer world-leading security protections. A bill moving through Congress called the Open App Markets Act will open seniors up to more scams and hacking by banning app stores from removing dangerous apps and payment software. Don't expose our seniors to more hurt, confusion, and online theft. Tell Congress to vote no on the Open App Markets Act. Visit netchoice.org. That's netchoice.org for more information. So, Jim Garrity, Biden has been very pleased. The administration's been biking the football about a decline in gas prices that I think, reached 100 days straight or something like that. And then you have OPEC Plus coming in and saying, you know what, we think maybe we're going to cut production maybe by a million barrels a day, and the Biden folks undertake a massive lobbying campaign. You can't do that. That will destroy your relationship with the United States, destroy your relationship with the West, harm the global economy. No way, no how. And OPEC Plus says, okay, we'll cut it by 2 million.
Yeah. So I'd like to point out that as gas prices peaked in mid-June, you started seeing the decline in mid to late June, into August, into July, into August. And around August, you could find publications like The New Republic and Politico and Bloomberg all treating the issue of high gas prices like it had been resolved. That the good news, Democrats, you don't need to worry about it. The issue's gone away. It's not coming up as much in focus groups. Everything's fine. Now, keep in mind, gas went down to like $3.70 a gallon as a national average. God help you if you're on the West Coast. That's lower than the $5 a gallon national average of mid-June, but that's still not a good price. And as I've frequently mentioned on this podcast, I don't think anybody I know feels like, 380, 370. That's great. In my neck of the woods, it's closer to 380, 390. And I don't think, because I think people look at their household expenses all as one. Concern about gas prices kind of gets lumped in with concern about inflation in general. Grocery prices are still high as heck. And so I don't think people are really feeling that much better about the economy than they did in midsummer. But Biden and the Democrats want people to feel better. Ergo, they conclude that people are feeling better because gas prices must be going down. And then at the beginning of the week, the Wall Street Journal and other places are reporting about this OPEC meeting, and they say, they might be declining. There's a proposal to cut production by 1 million barrels a day. Now, I'm not an expert in world energy markets, but I know that if you reduce supply, prices go up. And even though, we produce a lot of our own oil, our prices are influenced by the global market. And that can't be good news for us. And so CNN and various other, entities are reporting on this. And this was apparently, they emphasized full court press, pulling out all the stops. Janet Yellen, everybody was working the phones, talking to foreign leaders, using every ounce of influence and arm twisting they had to get OPEC Plus. No, it is not a premium streaming subscriber service. It's actually the 12 or 10 or 12 regular OPEC countries. It is then like another 10 countries, including Russia. So when you put those 22 together, you're talking about a lot of the world's biggest oil producing countries.
Yeah, I thought our guys, our marketing guys years ago, pretty clever, but coming up with NR Plus. And then I realized everything is plus. I want to watch a Yankee game. It's Amazon Prime Plus, it's ESPN Plus.
Paramount Plus, Disney Plus. Yeah. We really should offer people a really bargain version of National Review called NR minus. It's only a few things, but it's, really is. But basically, there's, every stop was being pulled out, and the Biden administration was going to put a stop to this. And then the announcement comes out yesterday. No, they're not going to cut production by 1 million barrels a day. They're cutting production by 2 million barrels a day. And you got to look at this and figure, this full court press, not only did it not work, I kind of wonder if it backfired. I wonder if there's something about it pissed off all the people we were trying to persuade on this. So now, there's a guy at Gas Buddy who says, yeah, you'll probably see prices go up 15 cents to 30 cents a gallon. Technically, the production cut is not supposed to go into effect until after November, but you're going to feel it sooner because the guys running the gas stations.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, you got to buy your gas down the road. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that $4 is kind of a price point. If you're back up above that, I think it's really noticeable to people. Again, not that it ever entirely went away. So, Maddy, this just seems very basic, like oil geopolitics 101. We're sitting on a bunch of energy here in the United States, and you either can go all out and producing in it and investing in future production, or you need to get along with the Saudis, right? You can't call the Saudis a pariah state. You can't snub them in various ways. So you're either going to be reliant on your own production or you're going to be reliant on foreign production. And to crack down on your own production and say offensive things to this crappy little monarchy, they're sitting on a bunch of oil with a huge influence on the global market. Those things don't add up, and you do both and you're going to be in a world of hurt, and they're in a world of hurt.
Right, exactly. They have snubbed Biden, but Biden, of course, snubbed them first. It's, I think, useful to recognize as well that they are ultimately, yes, this is a snub to Biden, but it's ultimately they're acting out of self-interest here. Their credibility, OPEC Plus credibility, is already kind of suffering. They have this wide gulf between their targets and their actual output. Actually not meeting that just means there's more demand, and so you can actually charge more for it. So why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't you make cuts if you're getting more money for it anyway? Well, one reason why you might not do this is if you don't want to piss off the United States, but they don't seem too concerned about that, which just makes Biden look very weak, unfortunately. And certainly, I think one thing that I notice as well is, like, in the UK and much of Europe, we have this energy crisis, and actually I've never seen, obviously the pound has reached this historic low, and it's just insane seeing pounds and dollars pretty much equivalent. And that's because America has energy and Europe doesn't. But of course, that is dependent on, as you say, production, and the strategy of the left in cutting that for climate reasons has obviously been self-defeating. It's high time they recognized that and went in a different direction, as Germany has belatedly had to do. But Biden is not going to do that. And so that's the reason we're in this mess.
So, Charlie, where are you? There are two ways to look at this, not entirely mutually exclusive. But one is, look, the Saudis and other OPEC producers, they're just pursuing their interest. They're looking at declining price of oil, and they're going to take a hit from that. So they want to bump up the price, and they would do that no matter who was sitting in the White House. And then there's the interpretation, well, this is really a statement about Biden's weakness and how no one fears him, and therefore he has no sway.
Well, I think to some extent both of those are true. I think this is the sort of thing that OPEC does. When did the last oil crisis start? 1973? So Nixon was in the White House, not Carter, although the gas lines are associated with Carter. But I don't think Biden does much to discourage it. Nobody really looks at him and says, I'm worried about him, either because he's so dynamic or because he's unpredictable. Mm-hmm. I don't say this as a broad endorsement, but one of Trump's advantages in foreign affairs was his unpredictability. People wondered what that crazy guy would do. I broadly see this issue exactly as you described it. I think that the United States can either produce its own oil or it can get it from elsewhere. And that's because the American people want oil. There's no dip in demand for energy, and there won't be one. No one is going to convince people who enjoy the living standards we enjoy here to go backwards. And as such, it will become, and is indeed, politically unsustainable for a president or a Congress to fail to obtain gasoline. So what have we seen since Biden came in and has been somewhat hostile towards domestic production? We've seen the use of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We've seen the president begging Saudi Arabia and OPEC, and now Venezuela. It's going to come from somewhere. And given that, why aren't we producing it ourselves? This is also how I see nuclear energy. We're going to need energy. We're going to need something to replace coal. If we don't like fracking. So pick your poison. And it seems obvious to me that we should max out domestic energy production and refinery capacity, which are separate things. Sometimes we take oil out of the ground here and then we send it to another country to be refined, and then we bring it back in. We do that with pipelines too when they're not being cancelled. I find it utterly baffling at a 30,000 feet level that we have been blessed with these natural resources. I mean, just to step back a minute, it really is remarkable how blessed the United States is geographically.
Unbelievable.
And we have huge oceans to our east and our west. The first country you hit if you travel east is Britain. To our north, we have a friendly nation. To our south, we have a relatively friendly nation. Dysfunctional sometimes, but friendly nevertheless. And then within the United States, we have this incredibly diverse geographic vista, which is full of oil. I think anyone in the world would be a fool not to envy that. And for some reason, the prevailing view in the press and academia and the party that currently has unified control of Congress is not grateful for it. But the people are. And Biden's finding this out. There's just no way around it. This is intractable if you're the US government. Mm-hmm. So I think the way you put it is terrific. And I would say that while I think Biden is weak, and I think that's part of it, he just shouldn't be in this position. We shouldn't be begging other nations to help us. There are countries in the world that have to rely on others for their key natural resources, but we're not one of them. And to voluntarily put ourselves in that position is an abdication of responsibility at the highest level.
So, Jim, obviously the reason they have put us in that position is they are burning with great righteousness over the issue of climate change. Where are you on climate change now? What's your read on the science broadly, and what policies, if any, would you adopt to try to address it?
Well, that's a simple question. We can wrap up the issue quickly. I think the single most useful lesson of recent years was looking at the global carbon emissions for the year 2020. Listeners remember that something pretty dramatic happened that year. Right around March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic's full effect became clear, and in an experience that really none of us had ever lived through before, society came to a screeching halt. You can talk to seismologists who can say they could hear more about what was going on in the Earth's crust because the background noise of human activity had been reduced to such a low level, right? That was about
became more like North Korea.
People were in their apartments and in their homes, and people were not driving around, and factories were idled, and all kinds of ordinary human economic activity. They slammed the brakes, and it came to a screeching halt. And it really wasn't until May, you may recall, people were started allowed to go back to barber shops again and some of the basic stuff and things like that. As we know, air travel took a long time to recover during the pandemic. So you think about things that would stop people from producing carbon emissions. The COVID-19 pandemic is about as big and sweeping and bigger than any piece of legislation you could ever pass. Mm-hmm. Global carbon emissions were up in 2020. Mm-hmm. Even with that, it was higher than the year before. So it is an indicator that you cannot reduce demand, you cannot reduce human activity to a level where it does not increase carbon emissions. The only way we get out of this is by technologically innovating our ways. Now, maybe this comes from tree planting, maybe this comes from carbon sinks, maybe this comes from innovations like technology. Look, I love more efficient batteries. If an electric vehicle was more cost efficient for me, then yeah, maybe I'd take a look at that option. But the idea that you can just somehow legislatively make people emit fewer carbon emissions is an absolute loser of an idea. And I think the experience of by the way, having kids not go to school, people not go to work, all this kind of stuff. There were all kinds of really dire consequences to that to human beings that you have to look at as a counterbalance. So yeah, maybe, you're emitting less, carbon emissions, but people are killing themselves. Well, I guess that's a permanent reduction in carbon emissions that way. So, basically the only way we get out of this is by innovating. There's no way you can legislatively force people to reduce less carbon and expect to have a thriving society.
And eventually we'll figure out how to make the green energy work in a cheap and reliable way. But
no, we won't. No, we
What do you
won't.
mean?
It's going to be supplemental. It's just not efficient or consistent enough to keep up with the demand from not just Americans and Europeans, but increasingly from Indians and the Chinese. We have a choice for the foreseeable future, and that is, do we, in addition to supplemental green projects, maybe 10, 20% at best, do we keep burning oil and coal and other fossil fuels, or do we move to nuclear? That's the choice. It's all the fluffy nonsense we hear in our debates about this, I think, is utterly besides the point.
Eventually, we'll figure out the storage. I absolutely don't disagree with you on what we should be doing now, but I think it makes no sense to try to force the spring on this and make the reliable, easily accessible sources of energy more expensive, or just not have them in the case of nuclear, in order to try to create this green energy future. And Jim, another lesson from the pandemic is just there was so much bad information that we just were fed by the media. There'd be an academic paper somewhere that maybe was a little bit out there or had some subtleties and caveats to it, be totally lost in the news coverage, and it become conventional wisdom. And there's just no way that's not happening over and over again on the issue of climate change. And every time you kind of delve into a specific aspect of it, like, when Ian was bearing down in Florida, I read up on Roger Pelkey's stuff. He's out at Colorado, an expert on hurricanes. And, he just says that the studies, you can cherry pick anyone you want about either it's having no effect on hurricanes, or maybe it's making them more intense. But all you get from the media is, it's making them more intense. And they take one study and make it seem as though there's nothing else. And this is the authoritative truth. But anyway, Maddy, something you said just a little sideways from this discussion, but related, something we haven't gotten to on the podcast. So how's Liz Truss doing in terms of surviving the economic and energy turmoil in the UK? She immediately got in trouble for proposing a tax cut, and her survival, my understanding, was potentially at stake. Where does that stand?
Yeah, so the important thing to understand about people in the UK is we're used to being taxed at insane rates. So I think that the suggestion was that she was going to reduce the tax for high income earners. And it's a much lower bracket. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but it's a much lower income bracket than it would be in the US, what's considered a high income earner. But she was going to reduce this tax from 45% to 40%. And all hell broke loose. This was, a return to Thatcher era and all the rest of it. Absolutely ludicrous. But she backed down under pressure. I think this is just the way. This is what we've come to expect now from the Conservatives. They will be cowardly when public pressure is put on them. Also, relative to Boris Johnson, who obviously took the party way to the left on economics, anything she now does is going to seem really right wing. So they're having that. But with the energy crisis, I mean, it's don't envy their problem. Like there's only so much you can do, and they're freezing prices is a bad idea in the long term, of course, because it messes with incentives. And so people are going to keep using the same amount of energy, and there isn't going to be enough. And so you could end up with blackouts, and that could even be quite dangerous going into the winter. So it's not looking very good.
Charlie Cook, exit question to you. Joe Biden or his Democratic successor, assuming there is one, will be forced by circumstances to adopt more rational energy policies, yes or no?
Oh, I think they'll be forced by Congress and the states. Maybe that is circumstance, but I don't know, because the ideological worldview that has led us to this point is pretty emphatic. And we're talking about people who don't just think that there is an issue here that needs to be addressed, which is my view, but are eschatological in their outlook, who think we're talking about the end of the world, and not just in 100 years, in 10. That's really hard to overcome. And the incentives in the Democratic Party are certainly not to find somebody who's more rational on it. So, I think it's more likely that the American public will force a change in their leaders, which will, in practical terms, mean a change in the parties that are running the show.
Jim Garrity.
Yes, but it will be slow and incremental. A good example of this is Gavin Newsom choosing to keep the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant operating until 2030.
Maddy.
Yeah, I agree with Jim. I think that they're not completely blind to the reality of the situation. So yes, but incremental.
I'm going to say mostly no. I just, per the latter point of Charlie's point, this is an existential commitment from them. This is like a deep moral commitment for them. It's sort of asking us, if we're ever going to give up our pro-life views, right? Is there anything that would make us give them up? And the answer is no. And I think that this is basically what they've talked themselves into on the climate. Maybe they give some on nuclear over time. That would be progress. Otherwise, I just think Biden hasn't budged the slightest. Despite this is destroying his presidency and is going to lose him control of Congress. But he still thinks it's an existential thing, and fired by, as I said earlier, this great sense of righteousness. So with that, let's pause and hear from our second sponsor of this episode, Babbel. As I've mentioned before, I took German in high school and college. Kind of regret it. I really should have taken Spanish or French. Spanish for practical reasons, French because it's an entree into a truly marvelous culture that I didn't appreciate as a 17-year-old or whatever it was. So if you're like me and there's a foreign language that you regret not learning in school, it's never too late to start with Babbel. Babbel is a language learning app that's sold more than 10 million subscriptions thanks to Babbel's addictively fun and easy bite-sized language lessons. You can finally cross learning that new language off your list with Babbel. You only need 10 minutes to complete a lesson, so you can start having real-life conversations in a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Other language learning apps use AI for the lesson plans, but Babbel lessons were created by over 150 language experts and voiced by real native speakers, not computers. Their teaching method has been scientifically proven to be effective. With Babbel, you can choose from 14 different languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, and German. Plus, Babbel speech recognition technology helps you to improve your pronunciation and accent. There's so many ways to learn with Babbel. In addition to lessons, you can access podcasts, games, videos, stories, and even live classes. Plus, it comes with a 20-day money-back guarantee. Start your new language learning journey today with Babbel. Right now, get up to 55% off your subscription when you go to babbel.com/editors. That's babbel.com/editors for up to 55% off your subscription. Babbel, language for life. Please check it out. So, Maddy, we got the aforementioned midterms going, and the biggest story continues to be the Herschel Walker saga in Georgia. The Daily Beast reported on an anonymous woman who alleged that she aborted a child she conceived with Herschel Walker, and Herschel Walker paid for it. Now, in follow-up reporting, after he strenuously denied it, she said, oh, yeah, by the way, also, I have one of Herschel Walker's out-of-wedlock children. What do you make of this story?
So it's, it's pretty bad. It looks bad. It hasn't, I don't think it's been independently verified, but it certainly appears to be true. I think there was a receipt shown for the abortion clinic plus a get well soon card with his signature on it. So yeah, it looks like he got somebody pregnant and paid for an abortion. And obviously he's running as a pro-life candidate, as a Christian candidate. And if this is true, which it appears to be, then he's lied about it. And that in itself is the bigger and more immediately relevant issue when it comes to politics. People can make mistakes, but they need to acknowledge them as such and be honest about them when they're brought up. And so this makes him look like a liar, which is not good. You've also had obviously his son come out and defame him, which I always regret when that happens. I sort of think that the golden rule in life is no matter how terrible your family are, just don't trash them in public.
Yep.
So it's just all very, very unpleasant. Whether this will actually harm him politically, I don't know, because obviously he's a Trump-endorsed candidate. People obviously overlooked a lot of Trump's unseemly personal life and various things he'd done that showed a deficiency in character. And obviously Trump himself was very, very deceitful. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think that the bigger issue in the Georgia race is obviously voter turnout. It's not so much swing voters. So I'm not sure how much this actually harms him. Obviously, it is just objectively bad. And the only way he could really put this right is to say the truth and apologize. But I don't see that that's likely to happen.
Yeah, well, he's gone too far down the other road now, I think. But if it was true, if it is true, that's the thing he should have done. I mean, he's already said it about a bunch of other stuff. So why not this? This is a different part of my life. I was a different man. I've been redeemed. I deeply regret it. And that kind of thing, it goes a long way with people. So Jim, obviously Georgia, and you've written about this, is an example of the party just obviously choosing a guy with a ton of baggage and taking the risk. And if Herschel goes down, it will be another black guy in Georgia for Trump. But to be fair, it wasn't just Trump, right? I mean, McConnell ended up sort of going along with it. And then at the end of the day, it's the voters. Trump can say, oh, vote for this guy or I endorse this guy. But at the end of the day, the voters got to go along, and the voters love the idea of Herschel. Remember his tremendous football career and like the celebrity or whatever else, and basically didn't give anyone else the slightest look.
Yeah, Trump's endorsement is a secondary reason why Herschel Walker won that Georgia Senate primary by a wide margin. The primary reason that Herschel Walker won that primary was because the Georgia Bulldogs won the national championship when he was there. He was arguably the greatest college football player of all time, won the Heisman Trophy, and then went on to have a pretty darn successful NFL career. There are a whole bunch of University of Georgia fans who have very fond memories of Herschel Walker. And as a result of that, he began with huge name ID advantages and kind of, a high Q rating, positive vibes. There are other guys in that primary, but they were all relatively unknown and relatively underfunded. Now, you could argue that, Trump started talking up Herschel Walker as a potential candidate early in the cycle. And you could argue maybe that froze out several other, potential Republican candidates. But I think if Trump had stayed neutral, Walker still would have won. And if Trump had endorsed somebody else, it's not a guarantee that other candidate would have won.
Yeah.
With all that said, it was very clear from early on, like no one expects Herschel Walker to step into this race and be a, perfectly eloquent policy wonk. He wasn't that. I think what's, perhaps most troubling is that since he started campaigning, we haven't seen an enormous amount of improvement. Previous interviews like with Maria Bartiromo, where he was just kind of struggling to articulate criticism of the, Biden energy policies. Again, not expecting perfection from this guy. I'm expecting a 3x5 index card with like 3 bullet points that he wants to, and he really struggled to get even that kind of stuff.
He just needed about 12 of those cards.
Yeah. And when I wrote about this in the, Morning Jolt, man, there were people who were pissed as hell at me for pointing this out. But it's like, look, guys, this is not going to help. I don't know if this is going to cost him the election. I think it's worth noting that he did not have a heck of a lot of margin for error. He was leading a couple of polls, but when he was leading, it was like 1, 2, 3 points here and there. Last few, Warnock was ahead by a couple points. I don't think that you're going to see an enormous, wave of Herschel Walker supporters saying, I can't stand this. I can't stand what his son is saying convinces me this guy's been a really lousy father for a long time and I want nothing to do with him. But I don't know if Herschel Walker has that many to spare. Mm-hmm. And so this could end up being, if 1% of his supporters look at this and say, I can't vote for this guy, then that might be enough to cost him. I don't know. The other thing to keep in mind is one, and this is what I think, probably will keep a lot of Herschel Walker supporters in his camp, is the recognition that the race could very well come down to this. As I said, if you put Warnock in a blue column, if you put Georgia in the blue column, it's very easy to see things coming out 50-50. He's keeping the status quo. So, and also if no one hits 50%, this goes to a runoff, just like it did last time. So it's the other thing, if you're a Republican and you're upset with Herschel Walker and you don't know if you can vote for the guy, let's say you vote for the Libertarian. By the way, I don't think they have write-in options in Georgia. If you vote for the Libertarian, that could keep Warnock below 50%, send it to a runoff with Herschel Walker, and then we decide what it looks like in early January. So it's one of those things where it's possible the damage to this will be mitigated by some of these outside factors. But I mean, don't that old saying, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. Don't tell me this isn't a bad news for his campaign. Mm-hmm. Don't tell me this isn't a problem. When the son comes out and just denounces his father, you can't tell me that Christian Walker has been a deep cover agent for the Warnock campaign since birth. I mean, get real here.
So, Charlie, one state that is not looking like a near-run thing, at least according to the latest polling, is Florida. It had these eye-popping numbers from Mason-Dixon, well-respected polling outfit that has DeSantis up 52-41, 11 points over Charlie Crist, and basically everything else looking the same, like a blowout. What's going on in the Sunshine State?
If that poll is correct, I think it is going to be a blowout in the Sunshine State. And to me, the most interesting part of it is not the DeSantis number. DeSantis is sui generis. He's a national figure now. He's become something of a lightning rod. He is a player within the debate over COVID and the recriminations over COVID, but the agriculture secretary is not. And yet, if you look at that race, the Republican candidate is up 13 points over the Democrat. And that suggests to me that the people, by and large, who are answering that question are not answering, who would you like for agriculture secretary? Or what do you think the most important questions are in the agriculture secretary race? But are you going to vote Republican or Democrat? I mean, I don't want to overstate this case. There are 3 major offices statewide in Florida outside of the governor. And all of them are between 11 and 13 points in the Republicans' favor at the moment. And almost none of them are the topic of daily conversation among Floridians, even around election time. So if that's accurate, it's not just that DeSantis would win big, and I want to focus on that in a moment. It's that there would be a blowout wave in Florida, which would have real effects. You would see probably a supermajority in the state Senate for the Republicans. You would see Marco Rubio walk comfortably to re-election in the federal Senate race. You would see Republicans increase their delegation to the House. And you would also see, and this is where DeSantis comes in, I think a new argument added against Trump in the coming Republican primary. The details of that coming Republican primary are still somewhat foggy. It's hard to know where the electorate is. It's hard to know what will happen if DeSantis has a really good first debate or has a really bad first debate, how loyal people are to Trump, whether people are less aware of DeSantis than Floridians are, or we are on the Editors Podcast, and so on and so forth. But there is a difference between a candidate coming in as the presumptive challenger to the front runner, which DeSantis would be, having won by 2 or 3 points and having won by 10 or 12. I mean, for DeSantis to win the governor's race by, let's split the difference and say 11, which is what Mason-Dixon has at the moment, I think would be enormous. He won his last race by less than a percentage point. Florida has been really close in Senate elections, in presidential elections for years. To blow out Charlie Crist by 11 points would tell us something. And I suspect, DeSantis knows that. And the last thing that it suggests, and of course it could be wrong, but the last thing that it suggests is that things might have changed nationally. I personally find it hard to believe that Florida is that far out of line with the rest of the country. Okay, I know it's a bit different. Go on.
Hold that thought, Charlie. I'm going to come back to that on the X question, if you don't mind. So, Maddy, Kearns, less favorable development. Michigan, we got a radical pro-choice constitutional amendment on the ballot that looks like it's going to pass. What's up with this thing?
Yes. So Governor Whitmer has said she'll fight like hell to protect abortion rights. And I think a bunch of pro-choice groups got together and drafted this constitutional amendment to Michigan's state constitution, which basically would enshrine a right to abortion up till birth for any reason. And it's the way it's written as a reproductive right for any individual. So no, it doesn't say adult. And this reproductive right also extends to sterilization, which would cover transgender surgeries and hormone treatment. And all this can be done without parental consent. It's so egregious. I mean, that in itself would make it one of the most extreme pro-choice laws in the country. But it also has scrapped the normal medical safeguards you would have, even if you are pro-choice and you think this should be regulated carefully. So things like informed consent, they've reduced that standard to voluntary consent. So you don't even need to be informed. You don't even need to understand what you're signing up for, as long as you're not coerced. That's fine. And it also makes it more difficult for people to sue should anything go wrong with the abortion procedure. So in a way, it's ironic because it actually puts women more at risk for the sort of back alley abortion that we hear so much about. But in any case, unfortunately, Republicans really aren't talking about it because they're spooked by the abortion issue. And so I think a lot of people don't understand how extreme it is. What will appear on the ballot on November 8th is a 90 or so words summary of this amendment, which is written in such a way as to appear moderate. It makes reference to fetal viability, which obviously was the standard in Roe. It makes reference to states being able to regulate, but in the next breath, it disqualifies that by explaining that it doesn't cover, for instance, fetal viability is defined as the fetus being able to survive outside the womb without any medical, I think the phrase is extraordinary medical measures. So that's basically the entire patient population in the NICU. That'd be all of them. So obviously that basically means up till birth. So yeah, it's very, very disheartening. And I think, I don't want to say it will pass. I don't want to be a prophet doom. If people are listening to this and they're in Michigan, they can still make a difference. Tell everyone you know, don't vote for Prop 3. But unfortunately, there's just a huge flood of misinformation, and Republicans are not wanting to get involved in the fight.
Jim Garrity, exit question to you. That's the point Charlie was just about to address before I so rudely interrupted him. So there was a Republican wave that was clearly on earlier this year. Then the Republican wave was off this summer. Now, your guess, percentage odds, whether the Republican wave is back on again or not. 0%. Forget it, Rich. It's still August. There's no Republican wave. 100%. You better believe there's a Republican wave. And Republican wave, loosely defined as 30 or more House seats and a couple Senate and gubernatorial races coming online and being won by Republicans without, unexpectedly.
In honor of future Hall of Famer Joe Klecko, I'm going to go with 73%. I think independents are breaking towards Republicans. I think the perception of the weakening of the red wave or red tsunami was Democrats who had been irked with Biden and really bummed getting re-energized, evening the scales a little bit. But this is going to be a good year for Republicans overall. There are going to be some very frustrating cases where nominating a lousy candidate has cost them what looks like it's going to be a winnable race. I think New Hampshire is going to fit in that category. We'll see how Pennsylvania is going to shake out. Oz is looking a little better there. But you add it all up, the circumstances are there for a really good Republican year, and lousy primary choices will only mitigate that so much.
So grain of salt, but my friend in Pennsylvania says the word is that Oz's internals, you can always discount internals. Internals now have him tied with Fetterman. And my friend is also impressed with Oz's campaign team for whatever it's worth. So Charlie, go ahead and keep on rolling from where you were and give us a percentage on this, whether there's a Republican wave coming.
I think it's 70%. What I was going to say is I understand all of the Florida jokes. I hear them all. Very good. But I don't really think that Florida is that different than the rest of the country. And in fact, I think Florida is less different than the rest of the country than many other states in the South because it has so many people from different parts of the country, has such a demographic mix. And if it is true that the candidate for agriculture secretary, the candidate for attorney general in Florida is up by 11, 12, 13, then that has to portend a good year for Republicans generally, even if it's better in Florida for various local reasons than it is elsewhere. And I do think that's what we're seeing in general. There'll be exceptions to this. It's still true in a whole host of ways that politics is local, but just some of the indications, generic ballot, governor's races, tightening Senate in places like Pennsylvania and another state that's a bellwether. I think we're seeing what we discussed before, which is that while there was some shift over the last couple of months and after the Dobbs decision, the commentary represented an overcorrection. Mm-hmm. And that overcorrection is now itself being corrected.
So, Maddy, I know you can be a little hesitant about getting out there with your political punditry, so no pressure here. I just need a specific percentage number that I'm going to write down and hold you to and return in the weeks ahead prior to the election. What's your percentage?
My percentage is 66%.
66.
A very specific. Since you wanted specific.
Impressive.
So as you know, this is not really my area of expertise, but from the authorities on this subject that I've picked, they seem to think that there is a Republican wave coming, and that's good enough for me. So that's why I've given you that number.
Yeah, so maybe a little lower than everyone else. I say 60, I think it's more likely than not now. I think kind of a standard midterm was baked in the cake, 20-something House seats and 1 or 2 Senate seats, and that would have been enough. But it looks like it's going to be better than that. I think the Dobbs effect, as Charlie alluded to, is waning somewhat. I think the economy is still an overwhelming issue, and it's not looking good for Biden. If anything, obviously, it's getting worse. Republicans have managed to bootstrap up crime in importance as an issue, and that's hurting Democrats. And you're just beginning to see some flashing red lights across the map for Democrats. So I think it's more likely than not we're seeing a some kind of Republican wave. Not a 1994 wave, but a wave all the same. With that, let's hear from our final sponsor of this episode, Segura. We know it can be difficult to make time for ourselves in this fast-paced world we live in, but it's important to take a step back and enjoy the finer things in life. Sometimes that means sitting back and enjoying a nice cigar. Introducing Segura, the next generation of cigars online. Join Segura and be the first to see cutting-edge products, exclusive offers, and limited edition gear. Whether you're looking for top-shelf brands like Davidoff, industry staples like Fuente, or super rare blends from Viaje and others, Segura is your one-stop shop for all your cigar needs. Explore its curated selection of industry content that includes reviews, food and beverage pairings, questions, and much more. Join the Segura Lounge and connect with fellow cigar enthusiasts alongside its staff, experts, and manufacturers, and be part of a one-of-a-kind cigar community. To help relax, enjoy a free gift from Segura.com. When you spend $49 or more, use the code WELCOME at checkout to receive a free Founders Box. This is an expertly curated sampler with a $45 value for free. So go to Segura.com today. That's Sigora.com and use the code WELCOME for your free gift. Give back to yourself. Segura. Shop, connect, share. Again, Segura.com, code WELCOME. Please check it out. So, Charlie, after a on-again, off-again drama that seemed quite off again, if Elon Musk could convince a Delaware court to go along with being off again, is now on again because the Delaware court was not likely to go along. So Elon Musk is purchasing Twitter at the original price that had been agreed to, and the freakout has begun. Yet again, we saw Robert Reich, the former Clinton labor secretary, tweeting, "Oh my gosh, we can't have multi-billionaires owning social media companies. That's not free speech. That's oligarchy." Apparently, he's never checked out the net worth of Mark Zuckerberg or, for that matter, Jack Dorsey, who was the co-founder and CEO of Twitter for quite a long time. And then you have others saying this could affect the midterm elections. This is going to affect our politics. Oh my gosh, Elon Musk might make arbitrary decisions about what to favor and disfavor on Twitter, and that could have political consequences.
I have come to the view over time that these people can't see it. I think some of them are irredeemable hacks, but I think most of them just can't see it. They just assume that their own preferences are normal and that anyone else's are a deviation. Thus, if Twitter or Facebook are run by billionaires that make decisions they like or donations of which they approve, that's fine. But if Twitter or Facebook or any other company is run by a billionaire who has views they abhor, then suddenly it's an issue. It's undemocratic even. It's absolutely farcical to see Robert Reich saying this. Twitter was owned by Jack Dorsey. He's a billionaire. Facebook is owned by Mark Zuckerberg. He's a billionaire. The Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. That never seems to upset him. Suddenly, we can't have our tech companies run by billionaires. Come on. But what is more annoying to me is the insistence that if Elon Musk takes over Twitter, suddenly we will see capricious and maybe even politically informed moderation decisions, which, of course, Twitter already has. Now, Ben Collins, who's one of the worst people in all of journalism and should be ashamed of himself.
So who is he and what does he cover?
He covers disinformation for NBC.
Yes, that's never a good sign.
I mean, his beat is disinformation. That's what
all
you need
you
to say.
know about that woman in Brookings, who briefly the disinformation czar, was that she was an expert in disinformation. That
Right.
should have automatically disqualified her for the role, assuming the government.
Ben Collins gave the game away. Because he said that if Musk takes over, especially if he does so swiftly, then it might even affect the midterms. And of course, what that tells us is that Ben Collins understands that the moderation decisions that are made by Twitter could affect elections. It's just that he doesn't care about it now because he likes those moderation decisions. Now, I'm out of step with many on the right on this question. I understand this has become a bit of a punchline. I mean this earnestly. Twitter is a private company. It can do what it wants. Twitter wants to delete my account because it doesn't like my face. It can. I would rather live in a country with an intact First Amendment and an intact distinction between public and private. None of the concepts that critics of big tech try to apply to them in a legal environment make sense. Twitter is not a common carrier, for goodness sake. It's not a monopoly, and it's not the public square either. But what Twitter is biased. I'm not blind to the issue. I can see it just as far as can anybody else. Twitter has a worldview. Twitter has a corporate conception of what constitutes misinformation or unacceptable speech or hate speech or whatever. And it already makes these judgments. So we have all seen this, people who say things that are against the prevailing elite consensus on, say, trans issues, lose their account. They get removed. But the Communist Party of China is allowed to stay on. That's a decision. It's Twitter's decision to make, but it's a decision. And presumably Elon Musk will make different ones. Maybe he will allow people to say, I don't think a man can become a woman, but he will kick off the dictatorship in Iran. The question here is on the merits. It's not structural. The pretense is that it's structural, that suddenly we are going to see a lack of moderation. Suddenly we are going to see biased censorship. Suddenly we're going to see contortions caused by a change in ownership. Not suddenly. This is already happening. It's true that Musk might change the rules. Now, I, a while ago when this first came up, offered Musk some unsolicited advice that I'm sure he won't read, saying, don't do that. Don't put in place any viewpoint discrimination of any sort. Instead, have, and this is counterintuitive, more rules than Twitter currently has, but that are neutral in nature. For example, nothing to do with feelings or immutable characteristics, but let's have rules against threats. If you say to someone else on Twitter, I'm going to kill you, sure, lose your account. I think Musk should take a step backwards and compile a list, even if it's 500 bullet points long, of the things that you cannot do on Twitter. Because funnily enough, it's not lots of rules that have made Twitter such a mess. It's the lack of them. It's the implementation of a set.
Because they'll say, dehumanizing is against our rules, and then they
precisely.
Right.
They're vague, and therefore they are capricious. There is a great deal of dehumanization that goes on Twitter that is ignored. There is a great deal of antisocial behavior.
Dehumanation is the point of much of Twitter.
Well, right. And the most obvious example of this that I can remember was back during the riots of 2020, not just on Twitter in some dark corner, but in the trending bar was an invitation to burn down Louisville, Kentucky, which of course violates all sorts of Twitter's rules, at least as they're stated, but was ignored because the cause in which the burning down was being recommended was deemed just, which is a long way of saying Twitter's a private company. If it changes hands, it is going to be the product of its private owners as it is now. The idea that we are only now going to see a judgment calls is absolutely ridiculous. The idea that now we are going to see political impact is absolutely ridiculous. The idea that now we're going to see a billionaire exercising power over the tech sector is absolutely ridiculous. But that if Elon Musk wants to make Twitter better than it currently is, it can never be good. Its nature is antithetical to good. But if he wants to make it better than it is, instead of just changing the dials in a direction that he feels more comfortable with, he will think long and hard about how he can establish a set of more neutral principles that take out a great deal of the scope for bias.
So, Maddy, one of the counts against Musk among people who hate him is wow, the Twitter employees really, the Slack channel is burning up with animosity towards Elon Musk, and they're all going to leave. And if you knew nothing else about Twitter's policies, you would think, okay, this must be a company that's beholden to a bunch of hyper online progressive people living in a really blue area who live in a bubble and don't realize there is any counter view or any counter view that has legitimacy, and that's how. And they basically run this company. It's beholden to them, right? Which is basically the case. And if you think Twitter is an important public forum, it shouldn't be. Its policies shouldn't be, and priorities shouldn't be dictated by a small group of out of touch people.
Yeah, I mean, to pick up on something Charlie said, so the idea of having more neutral principles, I think part of the problem is that the people who currently work at Twitter and Elon Musk's predecessor did think that they'd achieved that. They thought they had these neutral principles. Like, everybody can agree that hate is bad, so we'll just say that this will be a place where you can't have hate. But of course, it's not the principles, it's the application of them, it's the interpretation of them. And I don't have any solutions for this. I don't know how you get around this, because I think whatever principles you have, you are going to have to draw the line somewhere. And there's going to be an expectation that you do so with some sort of consistency. And I don't know how you do that except by, as Charlie says, declaring upfront what your biases are. Now, it may be that one of your principles is that this will be a place for heterodoxy and debate. But even before Musk, that was supposed to be one of their principles. I mean, Jack Dorsey said this is the free speech wing of the free speech party. Obviously, he didn't live up to that. So I'm not sure. I mean, my question constantly with this Musk back and forth with Twitter is, I don't know why he ever wanted to take this on in the first place. I mean, who wants to, be head of a company where a lot of employees say they hate you? There's so much sort of legal uncertainty. I mean, I think the Supreme Court just announced a few days ago that they're taking up a couple of big tech cases. The future's sort of uncertain there. And then, of course, whoever makes the decision, whoever has the power of whether or not to put Donald Trump on Twitter, if you choose not to, then there will be a lot of people who hate you. And if you choose to do so, there will be people who are saying that you're singularly responsible for the demise of the free world. So I'm not surprised he got cold feet. What I'm surprised about is that he ever wanted to take this on in the first place.
Yeah. So I remember a meeting we had with Dorsey and some of his people here at NR in the office. Were you there, Charlie? Do you remember this?
I was not there.
Yeah. So it was, I believe.
I was temporarily suspended from the meeting.
Yeah, I believe it was one of these things where overnight, like every single social media platform and tech company decided they were canceling Alex Jones, I think, and Twitter didn't. And it was very briefly during this period when he was saying, we're the free speech wing of the free speech party. And, we had this hour long, whatever it was, meeting where it was all free speech, isn't this great? And then one of my colleagues asked a question. So, how are you going to handle, trans stuff if that comes up? And then this woman who was in charge of free, it was her job to be in charge of free speech at Twitter said, yeah, we're thinking about a dehumanization standard. Like, oh my God, okay, everything you said is going to immediately be out the window. And that's basically what happened. So Jim, take up Maddy's point. Why should, at the end there, why should Elon Musk want to take over Twitter and what's going to come of it?
Well, the first thought is that I feel, if for listeners who think this podcast is a rerun from April, when Musk was originally going to buy, my attitude towards Musk buying Twitter is very similar to the legal fight about, whether Musk is going to go through with this, is very similar to my attitude towards the legal fight about the papers in Mar-a-Lago. I just want to fast forward to the end and tell me what's going to happen.
Does he get indicted or not?
Every couple of days, this injunction goes this way, but wait, this legal filing goes the other way. And I don't begrudge any of the reporters who have to cover what they kind of nickname the TikTok, the back and forth, the day by day legal arguments. Just tell me what's going to happen. I do feel like every couple of days you realize at this point an enormous amount of what you're seeing in the media about Elon Musk is basically stuff that was prepared back in April And then they got it shelved because it looked like he wasn't going to buy it. And then in the last hour, 24 hours or so, they had to pop it in the microwave, reheat it, and serve it out as best they could. I use Twitter. I think it's much less fun than it used to. I mute people left and right. It's a lot more fun than blocking them because they can still follow me and they're angrily responding, yelling out into the void, and I never see them and I never notice them.
Why is Twitter less fun than it used to be? People say that on Twitter all the time, but I'm not sure what the difference is.
Well, but the first observation I will make is that on Sundays, there's myself and a bunch of other folks who are like regular, football fans, and we will all talk about each other's games. And did you see this? And, that seems a lot more fun. That seems a lot less nasty. Politics, you say something, and very often there is this, Rich, what was your last indicated column about?
Oh, please don't ask me questions I can't answer. Hispanic vote.
Okay. Well, that's because you hate Hispanics, Rich. That kind of knee jerk, or how many maids are you employing in your mansion? All kinds of like bad faith, nasty sneer, like the default.
How many is it though,
of
Jim?
discussing politics?
But you read you read that stuff? You like look at your mentions?
I definitely do. Because a lot of people like what I say.
No. Just assume they love. I just assume they love what you say. I don't read anyone, and I assume they're all saying this is the best tweet I've ever read. Better than your last one. And I printed it out for my family.
I'm not a Twitter fanatic, but it got much better for me when I just decided I'm not looking at. This is my way to say a few things, maybe every day or less than that. And it's not a venue for anyone to spew hatred at me or insult me. So I just won't look at that stuff.
That's what
I told you, Jim, the moment when I stopped reading my responses was the donuts. Have I told you that? When I went to get my kids donuts and I tweeted out how amazing America is as a country where you can just drive up to a window and people will hand you donuts without even having to get out of your car. And this guy with a Bernie logo tweets at me, it must be nice to be rich enough to spend money on donuts. I thought, well, this is futile.
The whopping, 89 cents each or whatever they were. Look, every once in a great while, you will encounter someone who raises a good point or raises a good counterpoint. So, my attitude, I don't preemptively mute people. You have a one or maybe more than one strike policy there. But I just think that basically there are a lot of deeply unhappy people in this country and in this world, and almost all of them are on Twitter, and they are using that as a chance to feel like, celebrities do things, and you can look at the TV and say, oh, well, that's stupid, but on Twitter, you can like respond to them and there's a chance they will actually see it. And every once in a while you see some celebrity, really blow their stack over something really mundane. I'm trying to think, it was like, maybe Chrissy Teigen lashed out on some local TV anchor who had said something kind of meh, not so praising her. And it was kind of like, you're Chrissy Teigen. You're I assume living a very happy life with John Legend, and you'd like to think you'd reached a point in life where that stuff wouldn't bother you, but maybe that's. I
had, by the way, brushes of celebrities on Twitter. I think Morgan Fairchild either retweeted or liked or responded to something I tweeted. I didn't catch it in time. It came up in my notifications, and I didn't go back. But that's a big moment, Jim. That only Twitter.
That is you and John Lovitz, her husband. Yeah. No. So you're right. Every once in a while, some random person who you. There are former Jets players who have interacted with me. I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Initially I was thrilled when Lenny Dykstra interacted with me, and then I realized that was a very bad thing. Do you follow? Do you see Lenny Dykstra on Twitter?
Is he going like really, raging tirades?
Yeah. He's always at some
this
bar.
Was worse for Dan McLaughlin, of course, because he went after Dan. Dan's a Mets fan, so.
Oh, he did. Yeah. So sorry, Jim.
Either way.
Let me just go to X question. I'll go to you first, Jim. So you expect to spend more time on Elon Musk's Twitter, yes or no?
Nah, it'll be about the same.
Maddy Kearns.
Well, I'm really only on Twitter because I need to be. So I think it'll be about the same.
Charlie Cook.
No, it'll be the same.
Yep, I'll make it unanimous. Let me do a real quick NR plus. We were there before OPEC plus, I think, maybe, probably not. But regardless, you should sign up for NR Plus digital subscription service at nationalreview.com. Your way around our metered paywall. Your way if you log in to see 90% fewer ads. Your way if you want to comment on articles and blog posts and be invited to exclusive events and calls with our writers, editors, and various other conservative figures. We had a meetup just last week out in LA at a joint called Killer Shrimp. We'll be doing more of these as the year progresses. So it's a great deal all around. We got a subathon, as we call it, at the moment, running for about a week, urging people to sign up. So if you haven't, please do. It won't cost you much. We have a great first-time deal running as we speak, and you can join tens of thousands of your fellow National Review readers as a subscriber and a member of NR+. Let's hit a few other things before we go. Maddy, you recently traveled to Michigan.
Yes. My fiance and I went to visit friends of mine that I actually know from Scotland, and they live in Lansing, and they have 4 small children. And it was really weird, actually, because their kids so it's 2 boys, then 2 girls. And at one point, that was what my siblings and I looked like. And we have an extra boy in the end. But it was just weird watching them interact with each other and sort of seeing my family in them and the dynamics. So the second boy, he's getting picked on by the oldest one, so he takes it out on the girl, which was me. So that was a lot of fun. We went apple picking and had nice donuts, which are a great American treasure.
Jim Garrity, we were out in California because we had the Buckley Dinner out at the Reagan Library. You had a good time?
Oh, look, I think that was, if you are a listener to this podcast and you were there, I hope I had a chance to chat with you and have a good time. If I did not, maybe next time. And if you're not a supporter of National Review Institute, look, we put on some fantastic events. I think the Buckley Dinner out at the Reagan Library might have been one of the best ones we've ever done. I had not had a chance to be to the Reagan Library, and Rich can attest. They gave us, this little walkthrough tour of the Reagan era Air Force One, and I was geeking out of my mind, taking pictures everywhere. Everything is perfectly preserved. It's the 1980s technology. You're seeing these computers and printers, and the replica of the football. The docent helpfully pointed out that it was not a real football. And that's good to know that it's not an actual, device that can launch nuclear weapons. One of my favorite details was they said at the back of the plane, there was a replica of a birthday cake. And apparently when President Reagan was flying on Air Force One, there was this standing order that it should always have a birthday cake on board, so that if the president found out that it was a birthday of any member of his staff or the plane's crew or any of the traveling press, at some point during the flight, President Reagan would come out and say, well, I hear it's a birthday for somebody today, and sing happy birthday to everyone. And just, it was absolutely awesome event, absolutely awesome tour. Wish I could have spent more time. And I certainly hope we go back there someday.
Charlie Cook, what have you been up to?
I've been walking out of my house and watching rockets being launched from Cape Canaveral up into space. So this was yesterday, the SpaceX launch, manned SpaceX launch. I think there were 4 people on it. And I was at home with my 4-year-old. So I put on the live YouTube stream on the TV, and we watched the flames start, the smoke come out the bottom, the rocket lift off. And then we ran out to the back, stood next to the pool, and watched it rise up high enough for us to be able to see, about 80 miles away, 100 miles away, and then watched it go all the way up and up and up and up until it disappeared. I don't know how long I will live, obviously, but however long it is, I don't think I will ever be anything other than absolutely astonished and thrilled by watching that. There's another one this evening, supposedly, and we're going to go out and watch that one too. It is a magnificent achievement of mankind, and to be even within 80 miles of it's remarkable.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I've been slowly working my way through this book I mentioned a while ago by Dan Jones, A History of the Middle Ages, called Powers and Thrones. It's really wonderful. The Middle Ages, in many respects, were not great shakes, but one thing that was just truly extraordinary, and we still have many of them around to marvel at, is just the cathedral building program. And he spends a lot of time describing the thinking and the work behind Lincoln Cathedral, which actually I was not aware of, but Charlie and Maddy, I'm sure you are. So is this part of Greater London, Lincoln, or where is Lincoln?
Isn't Lincoln in Lincolnshire? which
I do not
is
know.
not Greater London. At least I don't think so.
Anyway, extraordinary structure, and it just takes decades to build these things, and the cultural confidence, the faith behind it, the artistry, just the whole thing is truly extraordinary and an amazing part of our civilization. So with that, it's time for our editor's picks. Jim Garrity, what's your pick?
So, as usual, a lot of strong contenders, but I'm going to go with my colleague Michael Brendan Doherty with his piece, Our Nuclear Options. MBD and I do not see the world quite the same way. In fact, we're pretty different. I don't know if he'd accept the label isolationist, but let's just say he's much more non-interventionist than I am. I just love seeing America's enemies' heads explode. That said, we both look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine with great concern, and the degree to which the U.S. may be, I don't know if the right term is sleepwalking into a greater conflict with Russia, or just inexorably being sucked into a greater conflict with Russia, and the increasingly ominous prospect that Vladimir Putin and or the Russian leadership may talk themselves into believing they can set off a tactical nuclear weapon without having dire consequences. MBD lays out kind of the thinking process, the strategies, the consequences, the likely consequences to how you calculate those sorts of things in a really thought-provoking way. And it's, this is one of the very, this is one of the reasons I think MBD is here, to make us kind of challenge our what we might automatically be thinking, or our reflexes and instincts. And it's a really great thought-provoking piece.
It's so good, Jim, that I picked it on Tuesday. That was my pick.
Okay.
Maddy Kearns, what's your pick?
My pick is John McCormack's piece, What to Make of the Herschel Walker Abortion Allegation. And John just makes the case that if the story is true, then the morally right thing to do would be honesty and contrition. But John goes a step further and says that this is also the politically savvy response, and sort of pulls us away from the cynicism that we're used to seeing, where it's, we live in a post-truth era. You just say whatever it takes to win. And John says, no, actually, character does impress people. It makes a difference.
Charlie.
My pick is from Carrie Severino and Frank Scaturo. Justice Jackson's argument against race neutrality is faux originalism. I think this is one of the strangest developments in left of center thinking, that provisions within the law, forget the 14th Amendment for a moment, but even the Civil Rights Act, that are explicitly designed to prevent the government at all levels from discriminating on the basis of race, are being held to mandated. And this, unfortunately, is just another example of this phenomenon. And I hope it doesn't gain traction in the current court.
So my pick is a piece by Christine Rosen from the Print magazine on Kamala Harris and her incompetence, and what role identity politics has played in her poor performance as a politician. And if you are a connoisseur of anti-Kamala Harris pieces and just can't get enough, let me recommend highly this one to you. So that's it for us. You've been listening to a National Review podcast. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this game without the express written permission of National Review Magazine is strictly prohibited. This podcast has been produced by the incomparable Sarah Schutte, who makes us sound better than we deserve. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Maddy. Thanks to NetChoice, Babbel, and Segura. And thanks especially to all of you for listening. We're the editors. We'll see you next time.